Hey everybody, this is Jason Alba, and we are here for another YouTube Live. I've taken some time off. It's been, I think I went to my YouTube channel and it said it's been a month since I've had anything up. So definitely wasn't my intention, but I've been really busy with some various projects that I've been working on. But I've been meaning to come back, and I have, hold on a sec. Let me switch over to my better, okay, we're good on the mic. All right, so anyways, I've been meaning to come back, and obviously I've forgotten how to do this. So I got a question in my email that I thought would be a great way to come in and start up my live stuff again. So what we're gonna do is talk about this email that I got. So I got this email from Bill, and he says, thank you for all the tools and content you make available to help people become better versions of themselves. And yeah, thank you, Bill. I mean, that's really what I do, and that's why I do it. I was in a bad place in my job search and in my career back in 2006. And I thought, man, I want to help people not be in that bad place. So that's really a big reason of why I do that. And thanks for recognizing that. I've been using Jibber Jobber to keep my job search focused. And some of you know Jibber Jobber is a job search CRM, and Pluralsight to skill up as I'm transitioning. And I love that. So he says, I've completed the Becoming a Better Listener topic on Pluralsight, and that's the course that I did. Is one of my most popular courses, and a little bit of backstory to that. I didn't think anybody would like it at all. Honestly, I didn't think anybody would watch the course. I probably would not have chosen to watch a course on becoming a better listener, but anyways, it's become one of my more popular courses. While all the content is spot on, there's one piece that's missing for me. It's a piece I've been unable to find anywhere else. So either this is a recommendation for you to include it in a future session, or a request for guidance. And so here we are today, the YouTube Live. I'm 58 years young. Thank you for saying that way. You got to have a good attitude about that. I deal a lot with job seekers who are in, people who are in transition, who are older. And by older, let's just say 45 and up. There's so much job search, or so much discrimination in the job search, ageism, they call it. And it's scary and it's bad. I actually was 30, I think about 30 when I started my job search in 06. And I felt discrimination both ways. I was too young in some ways and too old in other ways. And it was just a yucky place to be. Technically capable and successful in all my sales roles to date. However, I've struggled tremendously with conversation recall. And yeah, you're right. I didn't go into this. I talk a little bit about some things with conversation recall, which I'll touch on today in the course, but I didn't make that a specific topic. So I appreciate your question. My wife can recall a conversation from a few days ago, and while she's telling me about the conversation, I feel like she's playing a recording. I feel like I'm there. So she has a lot of details. She recalls exactly what the other person said and what their tone and intent was. I'm the exact opposite. I can get off a 5-minute call with my dad, and when my wife asks me what he had to say, I can only recall general ideas. And it's like you're peeking into my conversations. When I get off a phone call with my parents, my wife's like, what'd you guys talk about? And I'm like, oh, I don't know, just kind of stuff. So not super uncommon. Same with sales calls. I often miss crucial points or intent. My big fear is when an account rep will ask me what I thought of our meeting and only being able to remember general ideas. So now we're talking about, I don't want to minimize or trivialize what Bill's question is here. We're going from what I think is a fairly common, or at least stereotypical, guy versus gal memory recall thing, with that phone call example or the story example. Now we're talking about it actually impacting your ability to do your job and your productivity. So this is where it's getting a little more serious. This is definitely not a case of thinking about my next question. On my Pluralsight course on listening, I talk about, when we're listening, we need to listen and be in the moment and really listen and hear what the other person is saying, and not just trying to think about how we're going to respond and how we're going to be smart and how we're going to, rebuttal or any of that stuff. I want you to be present and not think a few statements ahead. And so Bill's saying this isn't that's not the issue. And it's not a question of not being interested or being distracted. And as a salesperson, one of the most important things you're going to do is listen. And so he's recognizing all these things, and he is interested, and he's shutting down his distractions. So let's take some of that low-hanging fruit off the table. What I need and what I can't find is a way to practice active listening and improve recall. And so now we're getting into multiple phases of the question. So how do you practice active listening? Well, one of the things, let me see if I just wrote this down real quick. I did not write this down. One of the most important parts of active listening is that we do what's called reflective listening or empathic or empathetic listening. I can't remember, one of the two. Anyways, so it's basically where somebody says something and then you repeat what their message was back to them, not necessarily word for word, maybe in your own words, but you have this back and forth where, number one, they feel validated, like they really understand that, yes, you were listening and paying attention. And number two, as you repeat it back in your own words, and it helps them understand that either they may have miscommunicated something or you misunderstood something, but they have an opportunity to clarify and make sure that you really do understand what they're talking about. So that's what the practice active listening is. And my, the biggest thing I would say to practice active listening is to do that reflective listening where you are repeating what they're saying. And it sounds slow and it sounds repetitive and sounds kind of like a waste of time, but it really can be in a really effective way to help people know that you are understanding the message that you're giving them. So what I need is a way to improve recall. And that's where I didn't really go into the listening course, but it's an excellent question. So I'm going to skip the rest of that paragraph because I didn't fully understand it. I've practiced all the suggestions you have in the course, the listening course, but if I'm not comprehending the content for some reason, none of that really matters. And now we're into a third topic, which is, do you actually understand? He says comprehending the content. So do you actually understand what they're talking about? And I think that if you are, if it's a very technical conversation, then you can very quickly get in over your head. Let me just make a quick note here because we want to talk about this comprehend thing. I got all my notes right here. Okay, so that's just one more thing I want to make sure I talk about. See, I actually have a recall and a memory issue also because I get really deep into the heat of the moment and the heart of the topic. And a lot of times I walk out of a situation, I'm like, oh man, I should have said this, or I should have asked that, and I do this from when I'm on stage. I do it from when I'm in conversations or whatever. There's a lot of times where I walk out and I'm like, why didn't I say or do or ask or whatever? So anyways, the third thing really comes down to comprehending the content, and that's different. Like that's not necessarily a recall thing. And it's not necessarily an active listen. Well, actually, it really does tie into the active listening. All right. Do you have any thoughts or guidance you could share? So just real quick, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to Google and I'm going to put in, I think I put in improve recall. And, anybody can Google, and Bill has probably already done this. So I don't want to, pretend that I'm the smartest guy in the world because I'm going to go look up some articles. But let me just show you what some of the articles are talking about. And then I'm going to give you my ideas. I wrote down about 8 specific ideas here. So out of all the Google searches that I found, here are a few that stood out to me. So 6 science-backed methods to improve your memory. So let's see. Talks about what a memory is. Right, which I think is actually pretty cool. And when we're trying to understand why I'm having a problem with something. Let's go figure out the root of what that something is and what it's made of. And so I want you to understand what memory is and how memory works and why memory works. So that's what the first part is. All right, so the first one here is meditate. I don't know how I feel about meditation. Overall, I really like the concept of meditation. I love meditation. I think it has a lot of healing powers. And what I've read is that it literally heals your brain, right? So number one on this Fast Company article is meditation. And another article, it talked about mindful meditation. And I think what we're really doing is we're healing the way that the brain works, not so that you're recalling during meditation, but that you have more and better brain control when you're not meditating. So during these conversations and stuff like that. All right. So number two, drink coffee, which I didn't read this, but it probably has to do with the caffeine or stimulants or something like that. Number three, eat berries. All right. So now you can see that like the advice, and as we go through the other two tabs, we're going into kind of some holistic, how are you taking care of yourself? Like what's happening in your physical life and your mental life? All right, so eat berries, exercise, right? And now we can start to predict what some of these other ones are. What can you do to take care of yourself? Chewing gum makes stronger memories, all right? Sleep more. So I'm not necessarily gonna say sleep more, but maybe I'll say sleep better. So some people already sleep plenty, but maybe they don't get good sleep. All right, so those are the 6 from Fast Company. Let's jump over here to the first one that I had, which was an effortless way to improve your memory. And this is from the BBC.com website. And the gist of it is rest, right? And so it's not, this is where we don't get into sleep more, like sleep more hours, although I do think you should sleep the appropriate amount of hours per night. But this is actually talking about little micro rest during the day. So naps and stuff like that. All right, so let's jump over to Very Well Mind, and we got 11 methods. So focus, already Bill said focusing isn't his issue. Avoid cramming, structure and organize. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. Use mnemonic devices, which is where you start coming up with associations. So here it says come up with a rhyme, song, joke, whatever. Elaborate and rehearse. Visualize concepts, relate new information to things you already know, which ties a little bit back into that mnemonic concept. Read out loud. So here's something funny. When I went to school, or actually in meetings today, a lot of times I'll take notes, and I'll take good notes, but I never refer back to my notes. It's just the way my brain works. I have a hard time going through and looking at my notes in general. Not that I don't ever, but a lot of times I'll take a lot of notes and then I just never refer back to them. I have them as a reference if I need to. But for me, the exercise of writing it down on paper is very helpful, right? That's just, it somehow solidifies it in my mind. And I was reading somewhere how it's more important or more effective, I should say, to write it down on paper than it is to type it. So that I thought was interesting. Same concept here where you're reading out loud. I think that like kind of solidifies something in your brain. Pay extra attention to difficult information. Once again, Bill said that's not his issue, right? It's not that he can't pay attention. Vary your study routine, get some sleep. So all 3 articles are talking about sleep, and that's it. All right, so there we go. There's our articles, and that's kind of the basics of what the internet has to say. You'll see elements of those on most of the articles that you'll find about how to do this. Remember, we're talking about recall, but then we're talking about comprehension also. Okay, so here are some of my thoughts. I'd love to get your thoughts. Go ahead and go into the comments on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you're watching this and add what your own thoughts are on how you recall. So here are my thoughts. The first thing I thought about, or one of the first things was, I want you to, if it's appropriate, record your conversations. Now, you have to know that in some states, it's illegal to record conversations without consent of the other person. It's also everywhere disrespectful or kind of ethically dangerous to record without other people knowing. So I would absolutely get permission. Make sure that you have permission. When I do recordings, like when I do webinars and stuff like that, I will say to the person, is it okay on the recording? Is it okay that we're recording this? I'm recording this, is that okay? And they say yes. And so now I have proof that they gave consent for that, right? I've never had to use it. It's never been an issue, but I'd rather have that on the recording than not. So, one thing you might say is, hey, I want to make sure that I capture every important element that we're going to talk about. Would you mind if I record this? And I'm not going to share it anywhere, but I might use it later just to make sure that I really understand what we're talking about. So something as easy as that. And there's a lot of programs or systems or apps or whatever that help you record. If you use something like Zoom or whatever, I use this program right now that I'm on for casting. It's called StreamYard. It's about the same price as Zoom. I really, really like it for a lot of reasons. But you can actually do non-live casting and record it, and you can have multiple people on and stuff like that. Again, it's like Zoom, but it's and it does all the recording stuff, but it has some additional benefits that are important to me, like the live casting. So if you can, and memory recall is your issue, I think that's going to be one of the best things that you can do is record the meetings that you can record. Okay, if that means that you have a little tape recorder that you take to lunch with you, or if it means that you're doing stuff you're recording on the phone, or you're recording on a webinar or whatever, a live video conference, then I think that's a really good idea. Just make sure that you have consent. Okay, make sure that the other person knows and that you have permission. All right, the second thing that I wrote down, and this comes right out of the Becoming a Better Listener course on Pluralsight, is taking notes. And I think, so taking notes is kind of a weird thing. I want to take really good notes. And lately I've been in meetings where I've shared some of my notes and people are like, holy cow, like, are you a fast typist? And I am. Like, I love typing. I started typing when I was in 6th grade. And I've always typed throughout my entire career, and I can type really, really fast. I love taking notes on paper, as I already mentioned. So, but my thing is I like to take a lot of notes, and sometimes I'll put in quotes like, here's exactly the wording that you used. And so I wonder, Bill, if the answer for you is just getting better at taking notes. Now, the problem with that is sometimes you're not in a good situation to take notes, right? Like you don't have your note-taking stuff with you, in which case, if that's what the issue is, then get really good at having your note-taking stuff. If you remember the movie Hoosiers, the basketball star in Hoosiers, the kid that didn't want to be on the team, if you go back and watch that movie and look at him, everywhere when he's on screen, he has a basketball with him. It's like another appendage. He always has his basketball. And if you need to be better at taking notes, but you don't have your stuff with you, then be the kid with the basketball and have your note-taking stuff with you all the time, okay? So in the Pluralsight course, one of the things I talked about was some note-taking techniques to help you get better use out of your notes. And so one of the things that I really love, saw this from a boss that I had years ago. He would put little check boxes. Here's all my notes right here for this. So right here, I have a little box, a little check box. And so in my note taking, when there's something that I need to follow up on, I'll make a little box. And so I can know when I look at my notes, I'm like, oh, there's a box. That's something I need to do. That's an actionable item. Okay. So just a note-taking tip. There's a whole bunch of other things you can do, like put stars or asterisks or underline or whatever for things that are important or things that mean a certain thing. But my point is, my point number 2 is get better at taking notes. Now, does that mean you need to write down every word that you can capture? This is where it gets to that point where it's like, I can't concentrate on the conversation because I'm focusing on making sure I capture the notes. And that's where recording can really complement that. But I would suggest maybe work on your note-taking skill. And it's hard. It's hard to have an intense conversation where you really need to be in it and you really need to contribute and take notes. However, if you were to say something to me, like let's say you and I got on a call and it was going to be an intense call. I'm not really an intense person, as you can tell, but let's say we were going to have an intense call. And you said at the beginning, you said, hey, just so you know, I'm going to take some notes. So I might pause here and there, or I might look like I'm not paying attention, but I want to make sure that I capture some really important parts of this conversation. So just bear with me as I take notes. Just setting the stage like that helps manage my expectations. Okay, so I think it's really critical that you take good notes that you can use later to help with your recall, but set those expectations with the person that you're talking to. All right, the third thing, and there's something that you brought up in your email to me, which talked about how your wife will talk about the tone and the intent, when she's telling you the story about something. So when I take notes, I actually will write that down. I might write down that the person seemed really excited or angry or really wondering about something or whatever it was. And so this is stuff that you can include in your notes. It actually flavors your notes. So instead of just having like data points, you can actually say, here's what we talked about, and it was really intense, or they were really interested, or whatever. This is what in the database world or the IT world we call metadata. It's not the data right in front of you, but it's data that describes the data that's right in front of you. All right. By the way, I would suggest if you do recordings, watching a recording again isn't necessarily going to take care of a short-term memory or long-term, whatever, a memory issue or recall issue. But if you go through the recording and take notes on the recording or flesh out the notes that you've already taken, right? So now you have a written document that you can come back to. All right, so number 3 is Jibber Jobber or a CRM. Listen, when I started Jibber Jobber, I think I was 32. Let me see, 4, 6, 14. Yeah, I was 32. Okay, so quite a bit younger than your age. But I already had recall issues. I already had memory issues, and the reason why is because the level of complexity that we go through in a job search is really, really high, okay? We are talking about, in Jibber Jobber, you have contacts, companies, and jobs. These are the 3 main things that we're tracking. And you can have data about contacts and data about companies and data about jobs. And then you start throwing in conversations, and I communicated with this person, I need to follow up with that person. So you have contacts, companies, jobs, and then all the communications and relationships around them, and all the follow-up and introductions, and this person introduced me to that person, and here's how I networked into that company. This is a lot of complex information, okay? So I don't want to minimize what your situation is, and I don't want to minimize what your question is, and I don't want to say everybody has this problem, but I will say that a lot of people have recall issues. Now, you might have recall issues more than other people, right? And I don't want to take away from what your particular situation is, but hey, there's a reason why Salesforce is a multi-billion-dollar organization. It's because of the very issue of how do I take all this complex data and information and put it somewhere so that we can use it later. That's what recall is, right? And so I'm not saying that you don't have a problem more than anybody else, but I am saying that you're not alone, okay? You're not alone. I started Jibber Jobber years ago because I wanted job seekers and myself to be able to take all this data and information and be able to use it later. And I remember a few years ago, I think I said this in a video or I wrote a blog post where I was like, look, the best log entries in Jibber Jobber or whatever CRM you want to use, the best log entries are the ones that have detail. If I were to say, had lunch with Bill, we went to Red Lobster, he ordered this, I ordered that, it was good. Okay, if that was my log entry, and 3 months later, I think, okay, I got to reach out to Bill. I need to follow up with him on some stuff. stuff that we talked about, I'm going to go look at my notes. And all I see that we had lunch at Red Lobster and here's what you ate and here's what I ate. That's not helpful. Okay. So what I realized was the more details I could put in my log entry, the more value I'm going to get out of my CRM in the future. So, so my third tip is to use some kind of CRM, and you're already using Jibber-Jabber, so that's awesome. All right, the next tip that I have is to be okay with asking questions in your follow-up. I don't have a problem at all if somebody comes and says, hey, Jason, we were talking about this last week, and I just wanted to clarify, or can you remind me what you said about this? I would rather you follow up with me and ask questions and we go deeper on the conversation. I'm about to sneeze. And I'm a loud sneezer, sorry. I feel like if you're gonna do it, you gotta do it right. So I want to know in a follow-up that you cared about what we talked about. Like, I can't tell you how many times over the last 14, 15 years that I've been doing this, that I've had people have conversations with me, and I feel like we have good conversations, and I share ideas. Like, I'm an open book and I'm gonna share my good ideas, and I never hear back on anything. And I'm like, okay, well, was that a waste of time? Was it a waste of an hour? Like, they didn't do what I suggested, or maybe they did, but they didn't tell me. I have no idea, right? If you were to come back and follow up and say, hey, Jason, we were talking about this great conversation. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, but I'm not remembering right now. Can you remind me about this particular point? Okay. And so I don't think there's a problem with that at all. I think people today really value that we're being genuine and authentic in our relationships. And if we forget something or we need a reminder of something, I think it's okay. I think it's okay to go there. So I think what my point is that we need to be okay with asking those questions. All right. And I'll just add my next point, which is the one that I just wrote down a little bit ago, which goes to the comprehension. I'm having a hard time. Sorry, I speak Spanish too, so I'm thinking of the word in Spanish. I'm having a hard time comprehending, or comprending in Spanish. I'm having a hard time comprehending the actual conversation. So a follow-up to my last point, which is my 8th point here, is be okay to ask clarifying questions during the conversation, right? So the last one was in the follow-up, but it is okay to say, wait, can we pause? I need to make sure I really understand this. Can you explain that again? And that actually gives you a little bit of moment to pause in your note-taking also, right? It gives you a little bit more time to make sure that you're getting good and accurate and strong notes. So be okay to ask questions during the follow-up, be okay to ask questions during. This is a skill. It's a communication skill where I think a lot of times we're like, oh man, if I ask that question, I'm going to sound dumb, or they're going to know that I wasn't paying attention or something like that, right? We just need to come to terms with the reality of who we are and how we take information in, and how we need more information. And we need to be okay with saying, wait, can we just spend a few more minutes on this topic? I do that a lot. And sometimes when I do that, I find that people don't know what they're talking about, and they start to realize they don't know what they're talking about because they can't go very deep on it. And so we can have a better conversation, right? We can identify some of the issues and needs. In sales, honestly, Bill, isn't that a great sales tactic, right? To ask those clarifying and those questions that really help you understand and make sure they understand. So just be okay with the questions, and what I don't want you to think, and this is probably why I wrote this, is what I don't want you to think is, oh my gosh, I have bad recall. I'm not understanding this. I don't want to come across as dumb or insufficient. Okay. I don't want you to feel insufficient. I kind of want you to take this issue of having a bad recall and own it. And be okay with it, okay? If you were to say, hey, what's your greatest weakness? You might say something like, my greatest weakness is that I'm really bad at recall. But what that has done is it has caused me to create effective systems so that I don't miss the main points. And I thought this was a problem. I thought having bad recall was a problem, but now I have these techniques and these tools that I use to make sure that this is actually one of my greatest strengths. I'm not sure if that was totally off the cuff, but you get where I'm going. All right. The next tactic that I'll talk about is number 5 is follow up in email with details. This goes back to what I was talking about with my log entries in Jibber. The best log entries I have are the ones that have detail. Okay, so going back to the Red Lobster example, I might say something like, had lunch, and if it's important, I don't really write down who ate what, unless it was like an amazing meal or something that I want to try next time. I might write something like that. I do write down like, here's who paid, right? So that just so I know next time, if they paid, then I can reach out to them again and say, hey, you bought me lunch last time. It's my turn. When can we go, right? So that's actually relevant to the relationship. But my email. And I'm saying log entry because in Jibber we have this feature where you can send an email to the person as a follow-up, but also carbon copy or blind copy it to the Jibber server, and it becomes a log entry. Okay, so I stored that there. So in my email follow-up, I might say something like, here was Bill's 3 questions and 2 points, and here's what he was really concerned about, and here was my thought about this, and here's 2 follow-up things that I need to do. Okay, so in my email, I might say something like, hey, Bill, really enjoyed the conversation. Your chicken whatever looked really, really good. I don't even know if they serve chicken at Red Lobster. Anyways, your meal looked really good. I particularly liked these parts of the conversation. Like, here's the main points that really stood out to me. And I committed to you that I was going to do this by Friday. Just wanted to remind you to look in your email for that on Friday, that I'll send you something. And so what I'm doing is I'm basically transferring my main notes or my main talking points from wherever, my mind or my notes or whatever, into an email. So now it's documented. Okay, so you have that. I have it in my sent box. And then if I use a CRM, then I'm logging it under your record. Okay, so these are all different places where I'm putting my notes. Also, as far as the check boxes that I talked about, every CRM is going to have some kind of reminder or follow-up or action item functionality. So in Jibber we called it action items for years, and we kind of transitioned over to reminders. But basically, when you create that log entry in Jibber, you can create a little action item and say, I need to do this thing by Friday. All right, so the next one was to have a real to-do system. This is where we're taking, the notes from our conversation and whatever we're logging into our CRM and figuring out what our task list is. And this is part of recall. Like, why do we want to recall? We want to recall so that we can follow up on things. We can do actionable things. We want to recall so we don't have the same conversation over and over again. Also, of course, there's just simple information that we want to be able to recall for future conversations or whatever. But we also want to make sure that we have a real to-do system, so we are acting on the things that we need to act on. My system for a long time, let me say this. I work out of my calendar. My calendar is my number 1 to-do list. If it's on my calendar, I work on it. And sometimes I might have to move stuff to the next day or the next day or the next day. There's some stuff right now on my calendar that I'm juggling and keep moving from day to day, not getting around to. But when I start to get overwhelmed, I write a draft email and I say to do, say Friday, July 3rd. And then I'll put all the stuff, like brain dump of stuff that I know that I have to do. And then once it's out on paper, then I can just start working through my list. And the Franklin Covey system has the ABC 1, 2, 3, so you can prioritize all that. So all that's good. My thing is I need to get it on paper and so I don't forget it, because a lot of times what'll happen is I'll work on a project or something and I'm like, those things that I haven't written down that I know that I need to get to, they nag at me and they bother me. They take up space in my mind. They become mental friction and they impact my productivity, and they leave me wondering like, oh crap, what am I forgetting? Like, what is it that I need to work on today, right? And so When I get it into a to-do system, then I can get it out of my mind and focus on what I'm working on right then. Okay, so I think that having your to-do system can really help take away this. I think you have this level of stress because you have a recall issue, that if you say, okay, I have a recall issue, but I have tools and tactics and strategies, one of my tools is a to-do list. And if it makes it on the list, then it gets done, right? And so I can feel confident and reduce that level of stress, right? I think that this recall thing might be like a monkey on your back, where it's like, I'm a little incompetent right now because I have this issue. But once you start putting those tools and tactics in place, the stress goes down and the stress goes down and you feel less incompetent. I think it's really critical that we have this perception or this feeling of incompetence go away, right? And we do that through these tools and tactics and strategies. All right, my last thing that I wrote down, and this is, this might be a little controversial, is maybe go talk to a doctor. I mean, they probably are going to say, what's your diet and what are you getting for rest and stuff like that. But if there is something going on, I'm thinking about the extreme of like dementia or something like that. If there is something going on, then get a proper diagnosis and talk with your doctor, understand what your real issues and limitations are. And I'm not suggesting that is what your problem is, but there might come a point where you say, you know what, I need to go get a professional's help on this. I am slow a lot of times to get a professional's help. A lot of times I want to do it myself. I feel like I have what's called a high locus of control, which means I have control over a lot of stuff. But when I go to a professional, right, it is pretty awesome to be able to go in and have them say, here's your issue. We can give you a firm, real, proper diagnosis, and here's what's going on. Or on the other hand, it's really awesome for them to say, hey, you know what? We did the tests and you're not down this path. So you can take that off of your mental stress load and start working on other things. So now let's really go back and visit, sleep and diet and stuff like that. And then some of these other tools and tactics that I talked about today. So anyways, those are just some of my thoughts on recall and comprehension and active listening. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any ideas or thoughts, Bill, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear your feedback on this. But if anybody else wants to add to this conversation, go ahead and go into the YouTube comments, or on Facebook, go in there and just leave some comments and let us know what you do, like what really helps you with your recall, so that you can feel like you're being productive and you don't feel like that is hindering your ability to do stuff. So with that, I'm going to sign off and we'll see you next time.